Today we're taking a look at the first Belgian tech startup to reach a $1 billion valuation, Collibra. Worth well over $5 billion today, its clients include the US Defense Department, L'Oreal, and Toyota, as well as 70% of the largest pharmaceutical companies and US banks. So how did Collibra get built? And what does it tell us about building a startup in Europe? We sat down with a co-founder of Collibra to find out.
Hi, Stan from Collibra, one of the co-founders and currently responsible leading our data office as our chief data citizen.
Stan's title helps us begin to understand what Collibra does. Collibra's products manage a company's data like a digital librarian. It helps businesses organize, find, and understand all their data, making it easier to make smart decisions and fulfill regulatory requirements. Think of it as a super-powered filing cabinet that knows where everything is and can even help you make sense of it all.
Collibra got its start as an offshoot from a BOV lab in 2008, where all three founders were doing their postdoctoral research at the Free University of Brussels.
I could continue the research I was doing at universities. I could become a consultant, or I could go work at a bank. In my mind, these were the three options. None of those really sounded very exciting to me.
In 2008, Felix, after a trip to Argentina and having read books about entrepreneurship, decided he didn't want a traditional office job, but he wanted to work in the high-paced environment of a startup.
I was reading these stories, and in my youthful ignorance and naivety, I said, well, if those entrepreneurs can do it, why shouldn't I just try?
That's when Felix decided to buck the trend and become a pioneer.
In Belgium at the time, there weren't any startups in that sense. Europe, very little. The only way I could actually get there in my mind was actually to start a company myself.
To begin, Felix approached Stan already in 2007, a year before the startup was officially founded.
If it was up to us, we would have of course started a year before.
The company didn't sell anything for their first year and instead took time to figure out what their product would be.
If we all agreed to do a startup, what is the startup going to do? What is everybody going to do? Right? What is the plan going to look like? So a year before starting, we were already working on all of those ideas and plans.
To get funding from investors, they needed to prove that their company would have customers, and they got their first break in Belgium by getting a letter of intent from one of the customers they used to do consulting for.
Because we were young entrepreneurs with little experience, nobody wanted to give us the money without any kind of market validation.
Early on, the company supported itself with consulting revenue. Generally, this bucks the trend because in the SaaS world, company valuations are estimated by taking a multiple of the annual recurring revenue.
Any revenue that is not license revenue, like consulting revenue, it doesn't fit into that formula. There's startups who try to avoid charging money for consulting, because then that means that those dollars or euros are not going into the license revenue, which is bad for the valuation.
Collibra took this unusual approach to be able to prototype their product while intimately working with their customers to understand their needs.
The customer, they have maybe one or two big problems, and if it solves those, it's already worth them paying for it. So if you are so close to that customer and their problem that you solve that problem, then maybe you missing the other 7 features or the other 90 features doesn't matter, because you're already solving their biggest problem.
Financial crisis actually helped Collibra get its start, as all the largest US banks now require data governance right as Collibra was building their first product.
So I don't think we necessarily really realized what was going on in the market. All we remember is that those early years of Collibra were really hard.
For startups like Collibra, this meant an incredibly challenging fundraising environment as investors became risk-averse, capital dried up, and companies were unwilling to take on new suppliers.
We were just in those early days, just trying to survive another day, trying to find people who wanted to talk to us, because most of the time people didn't want to take a meeting with us.
The 2008 financial crisis was fueled by risky lending practices and the widespread use of complex securities. Poor data practices, including poor risk assessment, inaccurate credit ratings, and a lack of transparency masked the true level of risk and led to a rapid spread of the crisis across the global financial system.
It was very clear through the crisis that they didn't understand the complexities of their risk. That's what caused the whole thing to come apart.
The crisis exposed weaknesses in data management and governance within financial institutions. Regulators in the US and the EU responded with stricter rules like the BCBS 239, which demanded better risk management, data accuracy, and reporting practices. This created a strong demand for solutions that could help organizations comply with these regulations. Collibra, luckily, was well positioned to address this need.
Did we know this in 2008? No. But we did know and understand and smell that there had to be a better way that organizations and people dealt with data. So we were fortunate to be there at the right time and the right place. We're also fortunate to capture some of those early organizations that had to comply to that regulation, because doing business with them also gave us the capital to make our jump into the US and start our business, grow our business there.
So in 2012, Collibra did a funding round at €1 million and finally made its jump to the US.
We had this idea that we were going to create a global software company in enterprise software. And if you do that, the mathematics is very simple. You have to win North America as a market.
Collibra's founders realized there were two big differences between doing business in the US and Europe. According to Stan, Europe has a risk-averse culture, preferring to buy from large established American companies rather than European startups. On the other hand, in the US, buying from startup is seen positively.
They even think it's interesting that you have an accent, that you come from somewhere else. They don't necessarily care that you're not this big American company. They don't mind taking that risk.
Collibra also found that Europe is fragmented into many different markets, each with their own language and customs, meaning it's difficult to expand. Whereas in the US they found one huge market that operates on the same terms. To expand quickly, they needed the US market, so initially the team made frequent trips to the US.
What we did is we would then go to a trade show with a banner over our shoulders on the plane, and then we would go there, pull up the banner, and then just stand there for 2 or 3 days and talk to as many people as we could.
In 2014, Stan moved to the US to run operations there, initially operating out of a WeWork office. One of the main challenges in the US was the hiring process.
It's often so that they can sell themselves a lot better than they will ever be able to sell your own product. You think that they're the best thing since sliced bread because the way they sell themselves and the way they talk about all their accomplishments, and then you hire them and then they never sell a piece of your product.
To combat this, Stan learned to take the gut feeling into account when hiring.
And I've encountered it so many times when you ignore that feeling and you still do it. I've seen it happen so many times that it becomes a misfire.
After becoming established in the US, opportunities came knocking. According to Stan, other established enterprise software companies took an interest in Collibra.
We were so excited to pick up the phone and go on these calls. Not just one of them, but we all wanted to be on the call, right? We all wanted to, oh, what's happening? We're so excited.
What the founders soon learned were that the companies looking to work with them weren't always doing it for the right reasons.
When they would say, oh, why don't you fly to the Bay Area? Why don't you come show it here? Come to our headquarters and show us what you're doing. Oh, why don't you tell us more about it? Why don't you explain it? Why don't you even let us look inside the code? We were literally feeding our future competitors that are still our competitors today. And I hope they learned that lesson, that looking at our code and listening to us speak is not enough to win the market. And what we learned in that lesson, it is very important for you and everyone else in the business to always be focused on growing the business. Because you're never selling a business. You're always building a business that is interesting for somebody to acquire.
As Stan said, from the founder's perspective, the goal is to always keep building the business. So to adapt as the business grew, the management team had to take on professional executives, and that came with its own challenges.
It requires you to set aside a lot of your ego. And the thing is, if your ego is in the way, then you are blocked from growth. If you're not growing anymore, then it's very likely that your business will also not grow anymore as a consequence.
Stan and Collibra's journey took them to be valued over €1 billion in 2019, making them the first Belgian tech unicorn. Stan emphasizes that when they started, the founders were naive, but a certain amount of delusion is necessary to be a successful entrepreneur.
I think part of the entrepreneur journey is that you have to be a little bit silly. Personally, I always think it's going to work. It's almost as if failing doesn't even exist. I mean, you're just failing all the time. By trying and trying and trying and failing, ultimately you're going to find something that does work.
Based on his story, Stan has two recommendations. The first one is to take time to plan. Collibra spent nearly a year before incorporation figuring out their product, and many of their first years were spent carefully planning their moves.
Remember our original plans where I talked about 6 months? Very foolish. If you have the luxury of planning a little bit, plan a little bit. The second piece of advice is plan to dedicate 10 years of your life. If you take all the big examples, the Facebooks and whatnot, you'll realize that their overnight success was also really a 10-year journey in the making.
Stan emphasizes the words dedication and sacrifice, as there will be effects on friends and family like there were for him.
By dedication and sacrifice, I mean to say that for 10 years, there will be an impact to the life around you.
That's it for today's episode of Startup Stories. If you like this video, take a moment to like and subscribe.